Today, I'm with Justin Scarr, CEO of Royal Lifesaving Society Australia. Justin's been with Royal Life for about 22 years, 8 years as CEO. Justin was on the board of Service Skills Australia, now Skills IQ, for I think 8 years. And Justin is the Drowning Prevention Commission Chair for the International Lifesaving Federation for the past 10 years, and is also a life member of OSWIM. Justin's had lots of highlights over his career, but being the conference convener for the World Conference on Drowning in Vietnam is a huge highlight, which looked at the global burden of drowning with over 430 policy, research and practice professionals from 52 countries. I think is pretty special. So I'm really pleased to welcome Justin Scarr today for a chat on part of the system. How are you going, Justin?
Yeah, very good. Thanks, David. Very good. It's a humbling introduction, actually. I remember sitting at the back of the room at the World Conference on Drowning Prevention in 2011, and you know, that was almost 10 years ago. So I was 40, feeling like a young man at that time, and I remember sitting there having choreographed this massive event, not in Sydney or Canberra or anywhere, but in Vietnam. And just wondering whether my life was over, and whether things, I sort of peaked too early. It was a fantastic coming together. It was really an ambitious agenda. At the time, drowning was very much about recreational drowning, really much about swimming and lifeguarding, and we had been aware of some research in Asia that where the drowning rates in children were 25 times higher those that are in Australia, and we felt like we had to do something. And one of the things we decided to do was to sort of reframe drowning as an issue in developing countries, so an issue of everyday life. And so the theory was to take everyone to Vietnam.
Yeah, wow.
It was a huge risk for our board. We had the Australian government involved. We had the Australian Governor-General opening it. We had speakers from all over the world. There were 150 people from across Asia and Africa that we funded scholarships to attend. And there were a few hiccups, but it came together tremendously well. And I'm very biased, but I'd like to think it's been a springboard to greater engagement from the World Health Organization and more research in the region. And but that was 10 years ago now. So, and I'm still maybe an old man now. But let's have a chat. I'm looking forward to talking to you.
Yeah, and if anyone was more interested in that work you did, where could they find some of that data or information?
So the World Conference on Drowning Prevention continues. It was in Durban last year. And so, if you just search World Conference on Drowning Prevention, if you go to the royallifesaving.com.au website, there's lots of information and research. And if you just search global drowning prevention, what you'll find is so many fantastic people doing some really great work. There's the RNLI in the UK have an aspiration of securing a UN resolution for drowning some point in the next couple of years. There's still some fantastic work going on in Bangladesh. There was a study released by the George Institute for Global Health just the last couple of weeks that found horrendous drowning rates of young children in the Sundarbans in India. So, we're certainly passionately water safety, drowning prevention and Australian. But if you look outside of our borders, there's some really great work going on.
Yeah, fantastic, and obviously very important, as you say. So we'll get into it. In terms of well-being, what does that mean to you, Justin?
I think that's a term or a phrase that so many have been contemplating this year. It certainly it's having new significance in many ways. Certainly, I live in Sydney. We haven't had anywhere near the lockdowns that our friends in Melbourne are suffering through at the moment, but for me, well-being is really about one word, and it's balance. There are so many elements to my life, and finding a nice sort of balance between being engaged and achieving things in a work context. Having a family that's happy and healthy and supportive. Having enough exercise to feel like I sleep well at night. And that my body is aging gracefully in many respects. So, and that I've got friends that are also doing well and feeling like I'm adding some value into their experience and life. So it's very much for me about balance. I'm not always balanced. I think it's a process of constantly trying to, correct but not overcorrect. Sort of a harmony of somewhere between being happy, healthy, and feeling like you're making a difference in this world. For me also, well-being is, unfortunately, it's the constant is water. If I find that I'm happier and healthier if I'm somewhere near the water, preferably in the water. I learned that, I learned that in my 20s when I went traveling around the world for 12 months, that, any time that I was distant from the coast or I wasn't able to spend at least some of my time in the water, I'd start to get itchy and feel sort of out of kilter. So I found myself constantly gravitating toward places around water, and that continues to this day. I'm lucky enough, fortunate enough to live near the coast. I grew up in the suburbs of Sydney, very much in those days called a Westie by many people, but we caught the train and caught the ferry and went to the beach and roasted ourselves until we blistered, and then travelled all the way home. But I'm happier and healthier if I can be in the water at least some point in my week, preferably my day.
Yeah. And I absolutely agree around the balance. And, we're never the finished article, are we? We might be working a little bit too hard, or, might not be exercising as much, or not seeing friends or family. And so to try and just be mindful of that as much as you can, and try and, give yourself what you need, I think, for your general well-being is a really good approach. And really interesting you talk about water, and obviously this lifelong passion of yours. But in terms of the role of Royal Lifesaving Society of Australia, and its role in the health and wellness system, can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Look, Royal Lifesaving at a strategic level, we've been working on this concept for 10 years or so now, which was, most people would understand us for maybe swimming and water safety or lifeguard programs in pools, or they might understand us for drowning reports and drowning data. But, we've been working on this concept for a while. That it probably started in some work we did in Aboriginal communities in remote Northern Territory, or actually in Western Sydney as well. We had this concept that the swimming pool is at the centre of most communities, and that the swimming pool is a great place to realise sort of social economic benefits. So it's not really just a place to swim. It's a place where people come together. It's a place where people socialise. It's where they form networks, and those networks often endure into other walks of life. And then more importantly, the swimming pool being at the centre of most communities is also at the cross section of intersections with people that are in health clinics, or people that are working in schools, or people that are in aged care, and we don't necessarily always fully maximise the benefits of aquatic centres. So from a Royal Lifesaving perspective, in terms of being part of that system, I'd like to think we've made a reasonable contribution to helping people understand the many benefits of aquatic centres, particularly. That's certainly where our passion lies as an organisation. We've invested heavily, certainly at a national level, in a model which is all about data, advocacy, and action. And so using research to fully understand the health benefits of a casual swim once a week, and the benefits that presents to individuals, but also the population. Having a look at the dynamic of early entry level jobs, young people, and their first experience might be working in a kitchen or a local cafe, but in many respects it can also be, working in the sport and recreation field. Many people passionate about sport and recreation as young people, and so they're COVID's having an impact, but usually there are plenty of great entry level jobs that are community facing jobs. And so we've done some research that is trying to value the benefit of providing jobs for young people in a leadership context in the industry, across the industry. And so, I think that in many respects, the mission of the organisation is really about a humanitarian endeavour to save people from drowning and promote swimming. We love to swim, but broadening the benefits of that now is something that we've been working on for a while. We've done some really great projects. Projects is a bad term because it implies that that there's no sustainability there. But certainly in terms of seeding ideas and activities, we've done some really great work in trying to get. I guess the best way to explain it is that swimming is for many generations has been core to the Australian identity. But that Australian identity and swimming has been built around, blokes in Speedos or competitive swimmers. And so there are many generations of Australians now that didn't grow up around the pool, that culturally, economically, for a range of reasons, they don't necessarily think of that local pool as their place. And so intervening to try and encourage them to see it as a great place for recreation, for health, for jobs and work, and that, some of those programs we're really proud of. And if we're successful, we hand them over, and the community continues them. And I saw an article on the weekend about swim sisters in the Sydney Morning Herald, and that's a fantastic program, a great example of community helping itself and seeing the local swimming pool, being quite integral to their health and well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously there's so many facets there to the work of Royal Life. You're talking policy and advocating and projects, and I'll touch on the Royal Life National Drowning Report in a second. But I completely agree with what you're saying around how important swimming pools are for communities. And I didn't know this until I emigrated over here 12 years ago, and I suppose in England it's all about football, and that's a bit of a religion. But over here, I think swimming it's like you said, it's a national identity. And in Europe they have plazas, for bringing communities together. It seems in Australia we have swimming pools, community venues, which is huge. So they are integral part of our culture. And very much loved by many. And in terms of the National Drowning Report, then, and I know that's just been commissioned recently, can you just share some of the takeaways of from around the data?
Look, the Drowning Report is one of those. We released that with very mixed views, mixed feelings. Actually, we talk about 248 people drowning last year. That was a small decline, about 8% on the previous year, but that's 248 people dead. And the family consequences of that are quite significant. But it's really important that we understand each of those cases, and we understand the dynamics, and in order to prevent drowning next year, it's important that we understand what happened to those people. And so that with this year's drowning report, there was some really great news, if I can use the term great news, but child drowning under 5, which was described as a national disgrace a decade or two ago.
Right.
The number of children drowning in backyard pools is horrendous, absolutely horrendous. This year we're reporting, a 50% decline in young lives lost, and that's sort of at record lows. Still way too many, but certainly nowhere near as many as we were seeing 10 years or 20 years. And most of the work, there's lots of organisations that have contributed to that. And each year we have a new generation of parents of 1-year-olds and 2-year-olds. So, every year we have to continue to educate people, and particularly pool owners. So that was one area that we didn't necessarily get to talk about much, because the media being the media, there has to be some news. So the news that we chose to focus on this year with partner Surf Lifesaving was an area that was somewhat shared across the context of beaches, of inland waterways, of swimming pools, and that was sort of risk-taking men. I think we've got a real problem in this country now. Having successfully reduced drowning in children, it's now pretty stark that men are the problem, and particularly young men. The school-age children rates is pretty low, but then it starts to triple when the person gets around 15 or 16, which is the point of independence, where they're no longer swimming with their parents watching. And so 50% of drowning in people 15 to 24 was was during some sort of swimming activity or incident. And so we chose to focus on that, on risk-taking, on alcohol, on life jackets, and use the partnership between Royal Lifesaving and Surf Lifesaving to try and raise community awareness about the importance of underlying swimming ability, about the importance for making the right call around water, and about the importance of looking after your mate. And so, that was one of the things that we felt very strongly about talking about jointly with Surf Lifesaving. And the other area that's really, really challenging is to have a look at drowning in people sort of over the age of 60, but it starts to kick in at about 55, and it's sort of men my age who, might be swimming every week of their life or on their holidays, and it's just sort of a natural activity for them, but medical conditions, underlying medical conditions or the effects of medication catch up with them. And so we do start to see some drowning in recreational contexts. And we've done a little bit of work in this space over the years. We've got a grey medallion program, which is supposed to be skill building. We've got a swim ready program, which across industry is trying to raise awareness of men particularly, but also women getting medical checkups on a regular basis to make sure that they're swim fit, and swim ready. So there were a couple of threads running through the drowning report this year.
Yeah, and I think it was around 12% down on the 10-year average, which is good. But the takeaways for me, I think, were also the male prevalence, and 8% of all deaths being males. I think it's an interesting one, isn't it? How we try and get that down, and that age range between 25 and 34, I think, was you think about it, young men maybe going to the beaches or to the riverways, and alcohol and all these things.
Yeah, it's really challenging. I think that notion of risk taking is something that we don't really understand enough, and we certainly don't understand how to communicate that effectively to community. Because around the water, there's one person's risk is another person's recreation, in a sense. And so, something like snorkeling, is something that's fantastic. I love it. And I've introduced my son into snorkeling from age 3 or so. Right. But, that's one of the things that there are boundaries and there are choices that people make that, increase the risk associated with an activity like that. Something like, jumping off a jetty. As kids we've done that, as adults we've done that, and unfortunately we see that go horribly wrong too often. And so, where is the line between something that's an acceptable everyday activity into something that has significant consequences, and usually, unfortunately, alcohol is involved.
Yeah. And I know these things are not very nice to talk about sometimes, are they? They're so important. And when you think about drownings and deaths, and then you throw in COVID and the impact of leisure centres and aquatic centres closing, what? I don't know, this is a difficult question, but do you think there's going to be an impact on the drowning statistics with a lot of the facilities that have been closed? And I'll premise that with, obviously, each state is in a little bit of a different position. But what are your thoughts on that?
So the things that are top of mind for us at the moment is, what may be the risks associated with COVID this coming summer, and then a longer term view. There's been a little bit of press around about concerns about children this summer. And I certainly think there are some increased risks associated with kids that may have not got lessons more recently. But for me, that's more of a longer term issue. If we end up with a generation of Australian children that don't get lessons this year, and perhaps they never get back to get swimming lessons either through the school or in a private learn swim context, the generational impacts of that will be felt in 10 years' time. Right. Or maybe in 5 years' time. So really what we do, swimming and water safety is absolutely preventative. The World Health Organization backs it for school-aged children. But what we're really doing is providing a form of vaccination against drowning issues in young adulthood, actually. So the consequences of having non-swimmers, non-swimming children equals non-swimming young adults. Right. And that's what I'm fearful of as a consequence of COVID. But that's sort of a long-term impact. And I think we do have a little bit of time to study that and work on a longer-term strategy. We've been talking about kids leaving primary school, not being able to swim in this country for a decade or so. And I think we've got to measure that to understand the problem very clearly and put some measures in place so that, we catch up on those kids that missed out on this year. Summer for me, though, we saw this in New South Wales in 2017. We had fantastic weather over the Christmas New Year period. You'd really have to think twice about going to a local shopping centre when the weather's great. And so people were flocking to waterways of every description, whether it's, beautiful beaches, but equally whether it was day trips from an hour or so from Sydney. There's some fantastic inland waterways, the Nepean River, Bents Basin, the Hawkesbury, a little bit further down to the Shoalhaven. There are so many waterways that people can drive. They don't have to camp or holiday. They can just a day trip away. And so we did see an explosion of people in those waterways. And when we saw an explosion of people in those waterways, there's a few people that drowned as a consequence of that. So, I'm looking at summer. I'm seeing lots of plans in place at the moment. There's a lot of focus on COVID and social distancing in waterways. But the consequences of people flocking to unpatrolled locations, that may be a significant problem. And the prevention side of that is very difficult, very challenging to convince. The local governments can maintain and control their leisure centres and aquatic facilities and keep them open and manage COVID limits and all of those things. But it's those unprotected open waterways that are much more challenging. So what sort of prevention measures do you put in place along the Nepean River? 20, 30 kilometres of unpatrolled, unprotected stretch of water with many, many entry points with swing ropes. And so people get wet close to home more often than driving a long way to get there. So I'm a little bit concerned about that, actually, and we're having some discussions at a number of state government levels about what sort of plans can be put in place, whether that's local government, police, national parks and wildlife, or some of the water authorities that manage some of our recreational lakes.
Yeah, and it's a real systems question, isn't it? Because we've been able to limit the transmissions within, aquatic centres and leisure centres. I think just some data overnight from England. The restrictions are increasing over there, and they're delegating the responsibility down to local government level to make the decision. But the data around, I think it's 0.34 of every 100,000 visits is contracted, COVID. So the transmission, they're really low. And I think if you work that out, it's about 1 per 3 million gets in, 1 infection per 3 million. Third of a million. So that's because we've got, good tracking and tracing and good systems. We've been managing it really well. And, I think there was some communications coming out of Melbourne over the weekend from swim schools, saying that, we really need to get these facilities open. And I'm really pleased from what you're saying, if I'm understanding correctly, that we won't see the effects for a little way down the track. And hopefully we will be able to put interventions in place to try and stop that. So that's a positive spin on it, which is good. But with these conversations that you're having with, senior leaders in government, how have we not been able to influence, I suppose, government, particularly in Victoria, around, it's a health crisis and the role of health and the wellness sector to enhance health is obvious. And, it improves your metabolic health, your immune health, and it's critically important in even contracting the disease. Yeah, I do worry about, obviously Victoria's been shut down, and if there was another outbreak in New South Wales, how could we start to influence government more to see how important our sector is?
Yeah, there have been so many lessons through COVID, and I never say I'd like to replay the last 6 months, but certainly we would have chosen slightly different paths given the experience and expertise that we may have now as a consequence of that journey. I should just clarify that I do worry about child drowning this summer, but I'm most worried about the generational impacts over the next 5 years. So we're certainly out there. We released some research just last week talking about a 25% fall in enrolments. So we want to boost swim school enrolments this summer for a range of reasons, including that it's really the lifeblood of industry. Actually, the more profitable element of an aquatic centre tends to be the learn to swim centre. And so if you've got good numbers through that learn to swim centre, you've got good employment, and that cross-subsidise many of the other services that are really vital for health and well-being. But back to the COVID lessons, I do think that we have to learn how to communicate our issues, not just with passion, but with science. We're all passionate about pools. We can drop a press release talking about how horrendous it is that kids will drown, etc., etc. But in order to reach and influence the decision makers through this COVID process, we really needed to talk the language of public health. And so, we talk. Lots of industry now are talking about aquatic centres being part of a health system or a health and wellness system. There's a little bit of work going on to try and reframe the benefits of aquatic centres or recreational centres in terms of health benefits, in wellbeing benefits and the like. And some of that's catch up. But what I've learned over the years in talking to government, I think people would be quite shocked, but every government department has its own language. The technocrats in government, their expertise is deep. It's come from a particular, framework, and they all have a slightly different set of keywords and languages and framing and the like. I kind of used to explain it to a group, and I'm not sure that this analogy translates, but a few years ago there was a conference on drowning, and on one end of the conference hall were the lifesavers.
Right.
I was one of those, right?
Yeah.
We were passionate. We knew that education and rescue saved lives. And at the other end of the conference hall were the scientists. And they were researchers, and they talked about methods and they talked about results, and there was a great separation between the two. And so we've been working really hard to get the two to mix, because I think we'll be most successful if we're able to advocate with data, advocate with evidence, and also match the language of the system we're trying to influence. And so I think the early interactions between the swimming industry, COVID, and public health measures were absolutely very passionate, absolutely very desperate. But we failed to match the language of the public health decision makers. And so there was some very desperate but clumsy framing of this notion that you can't catch COVID in a swimming pool. And that was a little bit of research from the Centers for Disease Control, and it's, they stand by it. And I think most of us realised that the dangerous part of an aquatic centre was not the water. It was the front door, it was the railing, it was the change room, it was the interaction between two people. And so by going to the health department saying, you've got to open this pool because you can't catch COVID in a pool, I think we kind of ignored the system, and we ignored framing our message in a way that was more likely to influence the chief medical officer. The other problem in Australia was that, we're a federated mess. Frankly, and so we've seen that. Well, yeah, we've seen that with the National Cabinet. They sort of pulled it together, but ultimately, it's really important to understand where these decisions are being made. And so, within hours of Melbourne City Council announcing that the pools would close very, very early on in COVID, there was this domino effect across the country. And before even some states had any cases of COVID, councils were making decisions to close swimming pools, and so industry was playing catch up at that point. And it took us a little while to get our data and evidence aligned, and our messaging. And then when we had that, Royal Lifesaving put a proposal to Canberra quite early on in the piece when the Sports Commission came out with some swimming guidelines that for us were clearly focused on the sport of swimming and did absolutely nothing to help the guts of industry reboot, because it was about one person per lane. And, most people running a pool know that you can't open the doors if it's just one person per lane. And so the health guidelines, when they were developed, they had a sport lens. They didn't have a recreational lens. They didn't look at the broader health benefits of an aquatic facility. And so we put some advocacy work together quite quickly into the Sports Commission. That was accepted eventually by the medical committee, but it didn't go anywhere. It just stayed in Canberra. And so we weren't successful in influencing the health guidelines that were then done 8 times in 8 different ways. And then, of course, each of those health guidelines in relation to aquatic facilities had to filter down to local governments that made decisions about opening pools. So when I say a federated mess, I do say that in jest somewhat, and I'm sure if some of my colleagues watch this now will understand what I'm trying to say, but probably be a little bit offended by it. But what I mean is the system, the complexity of the system and the layers have made it tremendously difficult for industry to get any purchase on their arguments and rationales. I think that one of the things we've missed, and certainly in the last budget, a couple of weeks ago, the Treasurer has made, and the Prime Minister made a really clear signal that jobs matter. And we've done some work to show 67,000 people working across aquatic facilities and swim schools that were impacted by COVID. And if activity in swimming lessons is down by 25% on average, some facilities are reporting that their general facility activity is down 40%. That's 40% people in simple terms that are not employed in our industry at the moment. And so whilst we need to make that health and wellbeing case, we also need to increasingly frame this around jobs, getting young people, women back into work. And so stimulating activity at the local aquatic centre, I think, is a great way to employ people. And unlike other areas of economic stimulus, any dollar spent stimulating activity in the local pool is going to directly track to jobs. Actually, 60% of it will go into the pockets of people working as swimming instructors and lifeguards or pool managers. And then the other 40% or so will underwrite the costs of energy and electricity and plant and equipment that keeps those pools open for everyday people to have a swim.
Yeah, so, I think you've articulated that really well and provided some, fantastic examples of, where things have maybe fallen a little bit short. And it's easy to criticize it sometimes when it leaders, and it's such a complex issue as you say. But I think one of the takeaways there for me is around language and speaking into the government's hearing, isn't it? So when you're talking about employment and jobs and that stimulates the economy, these are all I suppose great ways to get our point across about the benefits of what we do and the importance of the health industry. And there's a lot of talk in England and over here as well, in Australia, around the National Health Service, and but what does that look like? Is interesting, but we definitely need to keep advocating for how important we are. So we've talked about, I suppose, how the benefits of swimming, and I think, from personally speaking, I don't think there's an activity that I feel better at afterwards than swimming. And I don't think I would have ever said that 12 years ago before coming over here. But it just every time you get out of the pool, I always feel fantastic, or the beach. And we are a nation of water, water-loving nation. So in terms of the evidence being clear around the benefits of it, that being said, 1 in 2 Australians has got a chronic condition. And if you could nudge the system to get more people swimming, what would that be? I know that's a very difficult question, but if you had to just give one.
Yeah, look, I mean, Royal Lifesaving is well known for promoting child swimming and water safety. And in that area, we've got a simple 6-point plan that, developed with industry groups like Belgravia, YMCA, Swimming, Australia, ASTA, AusSwim, Surf Lifesaving. We've all sort of come together a number of times over the last few years and come up with a 6-point plan. And a 6-point plan looks like, benchmarking children's swimming and water safety skills, a focus on balance. So it's not just swimming, it's swimming and water safety, and swimming for a range of activities, lifelong activities. We've got to invest in aquatic facilities to make sure there are enough of them, and that's a particular issue given that our cities are growing increasingly dense and diverse. There's a little bit of a plan around what do we do about kids that fundamentally miss out through economics, and many organisations, including Royal Lifesaving, have started to seed fund aquatics and swimming into specific community groups. And then, of course, one of the things we're passionate about is actually life-saving skills in secondary school. So, I'd like to think we have a plan in place for children, but where the really exciting part of the industry is working now is in adults. Most people take COVID out of the picture. Last summer, we were talking about adult learn to swim booming. Right. There are many aquatic facilities across the country that, had only recently added adult learn to swim to their repertoire, and all of a sudden, that they were getting inundated with people. And so, this summer at least, there'll be lots of blogs of famous people that we know that can't swim. They've taken on swimming lessons. Yeah. So I think the adult part of swimming is actually probably where there are huge benefits to get people that don't have a regular form of exercise in their life, and for them the walk is not enough. Not enough. It's there's not enough physical activity in the walk, and they for medical reasons the run is not achievable. Even though I've rediscovered running more recently, and I quite enjoy it for the mental well-being it can create. There's nothing like focusing on whether you can make it to the end of the street. It's in order to block everything else out that's going on in your life. But I think lap swimming can be a little bit like that.
Absolutely. There's so many things to think about when you're swimming.
I do think adult learn to swim, I think we can do a lot of work in that space. And I do think that some of the great work that we're doing in migrant communities and refugee communities, and Stacey Pigeon, Royal Lifesaving Research Manager, has just released some research where she spoke to a group of women fundamentally from Chinese backgrounds, actually, and talked to them about their journey, discovering a local aquatic facility and forming a small learn to swim group, and going from non-swimming to being able to swim that lap or two, and now what an important role that plays in their life. So, I'm kind of excited about that area of industry. I think there's plenty of growth there.
Yeah, and it's something that I'm passionate about as well, Justin, and I've lived and breathed that, managing Auburn Ruth Everest Aquatic Centre a few years ago, and you're talking about those marginalised communities and people from Chinese backgrounds and Muslim backgrounds, and it was brilliant to see. But how could we get more people, I suppose, active from these marginalised communities? So I'm thinking about as well, like low socioeconomic areas and stuff. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was looking at a map the other day of Sydney and where the pools are.
Yeah, and quite a lot in there.
Yeah, there's plenty of pools in the old traditional suburbs, but in some of the new suburbs, people have to go a long way to get to an aquatic facility. And a number of those facilities are closed or they're being refurbished, and there's a real contest, a real battle between community council, government to try and redevelop those pools or build new pools. So I think one of the issues we have is that in 5 years' time, we'll have chronic pool shortages across our suburbs, and those suburbs are probably the most densely populated and diverse places. So we've simply got to have enough pools. I do think that the funding side of this is important. I think that people do need, and it's more than just funding a few lessons. There's a real social dynamic required in terms of partnering with community groups to get them organised around lessons and activities. And so, I think that's an area where government can lean in and assist, and they often do. There's that we've secured funding from Sport Australia. We've had funding from the Department of Immigration. Organisations like ours need to be really creative in terms of matching the language of government and the funding opportunities, and trying to align the many benefits of a local aquatic centre to the policies of the day, and then finding ways to use those funds to connect community members into aquatics. And so, we've used everything from money that was youth diversionary funds to help people into the local aquatic centre. We've used money that is intended for anti-terrorism as a vehicle to repurpose that money into aquatics. And so, funding is important, and we just got to get more creative and work a little bit harder and match the language of the policy in order to try and that sort of comes back to that concept that if the swimming pool's at the centre of the community and it can be a meeting place, then I think that it's sort of limitless, the sorts of things that you can achieve in a community building sense in and around an aquatic facility. I think we limit ourselves if we just focus on lessons. There are many other things that we can do.
I've seen some great examples from England in really dense, deprived areas where there's washing machines, in aquatic centres.
Great.
They're not just there for for people's health. It's that connection and social capital, like you said. And I'm just fascinated by, the health kind of angle, because we talk about those chronic conditions, and I think the stats are around, we spend 487 million on the health system. There's such a big burden every day, but it's getting that language, or getting government to realise that if we put that money up front and we subsidise lessons or make it free access for some of these groups, down the track they're going to get the benefits. But that's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that in a policy sense, it's working out. Like traditionally, I think most people would view the aquatic centre as part of the sport and recreation agenda, right? Okay. And that's a system in its own right. It's dominated by national sporting organisations or state sporting organisations. The funding that comes for that is almost always about sport first and recreation second. And so I think we've got to do a lot of work to try and reframe the aquatic recreation space as part of the health system, for example. Yeah. And then unpack that and how the facility can be used as an extension of the allied health system. You sort of start to see the boundaries of that emerging with hydrotherapy pools, and there are in some states at least, there are plenty of facilities that are purpose built just to target physiotherapy or rehabilitation, and so you kind of got this model, this system where some hospitals have a pool for rehab, and of course at a community level you've got aquatic facilities, and then you've got some businesses that have found some seed funding to build something in the middle that's purpose built for rehabilitation. Yeah. And so that's sort of the boundaries of the industry and where it meets the allied health sector or the health sector. And some of the newer facilities have been built or designed with rehabilitation in mind. And so, I think we're getting there. We just got to work a little bit harder, and money seems to be the missing ingredient. Pools are under pressure in most communities. So, I do think there's plenty of scope there.
Yeah, I'm optimistic. I think we're moving in the right direction, and that social prescribing, what you're talking about, is really, really important. Gunyama Park Aquatic and Recreation Centre, just in Green Square, they've got the hydrotherapy pool at the beginning, and they'll have a lot of, there's a pool close nearby, and that was catering for your hydro pool. Sorry, that was catering for older adults and things. So that's still being in there with the aquatic centre, which is kind of what you're talking about. Which is
we do need to find a model. If you kind of look at the suburban pools and even the regional pools, my favourite country town, Tullamore, which is sort of ancestral grounds in many respects for me. It has a 50-metre pool, a population of 450 people. It was built by some returned servicemen after World War II, somewhere around the Melbourne Olympics, and those models are fantastic. If you're a kid in that central west of New South Wales in the middle of summer, you desperately need that pool and need it to be open.
Yeah.
But we do seem to be doing all right with the big regional pools or the big city pools that are very expensive and very complex. And we do need to spend a little bit more effort working out what's an economic model for the smaller regional community. Maybe not 450 in Tullamore, but finding a sweet spot in terms of being able to invest and build in aquatic facilities that have some rehab benefits and have some multi-health benefits, but may not necessarily be in that grand scale because economically it's very difficult to justify that.
Yeah, and maybe you don't need to have a 50-metre pool. Maybe it's just a 25-metre. We know how expensive these facilities are on, but that's another discussion. So that leads me on to my last question. And we talked a lot about the work that you've done and a systems approach. But in terms of yourself, you personally, in the system, how do you contribute to it and how do you influence it?
Wow. Look, the way I like to work, I don't know whether it's chicken and egg necessarily, but being the CEO of Royal Lifesaving, it is a tremendous privilege. I'm in a privileged position, but I control almost nothing. I've got a small dedicated team, very professional. We've got a network of state and territory organisations that do fantastically well. We have relationships with industry groups and the like, but I'm not really in a position to control a lot, which means I've had to learn to work from the perspective of influence, and collaboration is very difficult but vitally important. Investing in people in the ways that I can has been really successful and important. Investing in advocacy has been really useful. I use an example of using, through COVID, using my energy and expertise. There were lots of COVID pieces that we published throughout the period that was, written by me, but drawing on experience from a range of people. And many of those pieces were then repurposed and republished in different ways, in different formats. So, it's kind of an example of adding a little bit of commitment and energy and some expertise and investing in good people and good processes. And, I'm really just a small part of the system. But, if I can connect to enough groups and influence other organisations to move to places where I think they might do well, then that sort of, in my model at least, sort of amplifies the impact of what is just one person doing the job, I suppose.
Very humble, but you are a really important lever, in the system. So just continue what you're doing, Justin. And I think it's obviously a challenging time at the moment, but it's we all just keep after doing what we're doing, and working together, and that collaboration piece is more important now than ever, isn't it? So, okay, well, yeah, that was really, really interesting, and I learned a lot there. Before we finish up, is there anything else that you'd like to add, or any questions you've got? No. I don't think so. It's been great having a chat, and hopefully there are some people that see this and get some benefit out of my perspectives on things. They're just perspectives. I probably should have declared very early on in the conversation that my expertise is limited. It's a wide-ranging conversation where I have some views and a little bit of experience, but. It's a challenging time for people, but I do think there's light at the end of the tunnel, and I do think in Australia we've been privileged and very well. As bad as it is, it's nowhere near as desperate as friends and colleagues in the UK or Europe or the US actually at the moment. So we should reflect on that, and but I suspect that COVID's got a long way to play out, and so we will be working hard for many years to come. That's right. Well, we're a resilient bunch, aren't we? And I've loved the fact that I've been able to do part of the system today with somebody who's outside, which is a first.
Yeah, sorry about that. I've been, like most people working from home, I've been stuck under the stairs for a while. And so every now and then I like to get out and hear the birds.
Yeah, it's been lovely. So yeah, thanks for your time. And I wish you all the best for the rest of the year and everyone at Raw Life. And hopefully catch up with you soon, Justin.
Great. Thanks, Dave. All the best.
Thanks, mate. Catch you.